I saved a little alien from being crushed. Her mother and guards watched in amazement. Part 1. The weight of curiosity. The day I met the alien child, I was supposed to be fixing a diplomatic water filtration unit. My name is Corporal Dara Mwangi, and I was 26 years old, stationed at the Interspecies Exchange Compound on the outskirts of New Nairobi, a sprawling campus of domes and translation towers that had been hastily constructed 18 months after the Velthari made first contact. My job was maintenance, not diplomacy. Not xenobiology, pipes, seals, pressure gauges, and filtration membranes. I was a glorified plumber with a military rank and a very unusual commute. The Velthari were not what anyone had expected. Humanity had imagined aliens in every conceivable shape: tentacled, crystalline, insectoid, gaseous. We had not particularly imagined them as tall. Pale silver bipeds with 4 arms, enormous amber eyes, and the resting emotional expression of someone who had just watched their favorite cup fall off a shelf. They were graceful in a way that made humans feel like stumbling cattle. Their movements were deliberate, their voices a layered harmonic that the translation devices reduced to a single clear tone, which always made them sound vaguely like wind chimes explaining mathematics. They were also, by every assessment humanity had managed, profoundly proud. The Velthari did not make errors. They did not stumble. They did not ask for help. Their culture operated on a foundational principle that the diplomats had taken 3 months to properly translate, eventually settling on the phrase, "The capable do not require witnesses to their struggles," meaning if you needed help, you hid the fact. If you failed, you absorbed the loss silently. Asking for assistance, especially from a lesser species, was not merely embarrassing. It was a kind of cultural wound. This made working alongside them extraordinarily awkward. I had learned to keep my eyes down, do my job, and not linger. The Velthari tolerated our presence at the compound the way a large cat tolerates a well-meaning but slightly irritating dog, with visible patience and the clear implication that this patience was not unlimited. On the morning in question, I had been sent to service a secondary filtration array in the East Wing, the residential quarter where the Velthari diplomatic delegation and their families were housed. Families. That had surprised everyone. They had brought children. The child I would come to know was named, in her language, something that the translation device rendered as Sev, a sharp single syllable that she seemed to wear like a small bright badge. I first saw her from the corridor as I rounded the corner with my toolkit. She was standing in the wide, vaulted hallway of the East Residential Wing, which was designed to accommodate Velthari proportions. Ceilings 4 meters high, doorways broad enough for their 4-armed frames. She was perhaps a third of the height of an adult, which placed her somewhere around my shoulder. She had the same silver skin and amber eyes as the adults, but her movements had none of their sculpted control. She bounced slightly when she walked. She looked at things with her head tilted sideways. She was, in every observable way, a child being a child, and in the rigid, dignified atmosphere of the Velthari compound, she shone like a struck match. She was studying the industrial shelving unit. It ran along the eastern wall of the corridor, a temporary storage rack that the maintenance team had installed during last week's supply delivery and had not yet removed. It was not small. 3 meters tall, heavily loaded with sealed equipment crates stacked to the upper rungs, bolted at the base, but, as I had quietly noted and added to my work order, not yet anchored to the wall brackets. A minor oversight. On my list. Not urgent. Until it was part 2. 3 seconds Sev reached up with 2 of her 4 arms and gripped the lowest rung of the shelving unit. I don't know what she was trying to reach. A crate on the second shelf had a pattern on its surface, some kind of dimensional shipping marker that probably looked interesting to a child. She pulled herself upward with that effortless Velthari upper body strength, her feet leaving the ground, and the shelving unit, unanchored at the top and suddenly bearing a sideways load on the lower rungs, began to tilt. It was slow at first. The way disasters always are. Slow enough that you think you're imagining it. Slow enough that the mind says no, surely not. Slow enough that the moment crystallizes into something almost dreamlike. Then it wasn't slow. 300 kilograms of metal frame and sealed crates leaned, creaked, and began to fall directly toward a small silver child who had no idea what was happening above her. I had approximately 3 seconds. I want to be clear about what I was thinking, because I have been asked about this many times since, and the honest answer is, I wasn't thinking at all. There was no calculation, no heroic moment of decision, no internal monologue about species relations or diplomatic consequences. There was just a child and a falling shelf, and my legs already moving. I covered 6 meters in the time it took the shelving unit to rotate 30 degrees. I hit Sev at a full run, not tackling her, because she was small and I was afraid of hurting her, but wrapping both arms around her compact frame and physically lifting her sideways as I threw myself forward, rotating so that my back was to the shelf. The impact was not gentle. The upper section of the shelving unit came down across my left shoulder and the back of my neck. The crates scattered and struck the floor in a cascade of metallic thunder. One corner bracket caught me across the shoulder blade with enough force to drive the air from my lungs. I hit the floor with Sev clutched against my chest, skidding forward on my knees, and the shelf frame came to rest partially across my back. Heavy, but not crushing, because the angle had broken most of the fall. I lay there for a moment, breathed, looked down. Sev was staring up at me from 6 centimeters away with her enormous amber eyes. They were perfectly round. She was unharmed. She looked, more than anything, deeply confused, as if she had been expecting something very different to happen, and this outcome had not been in her list of possibilities. "You okay?" I managed. The translation device at my collar processed this and rendered it in Velthari harmonics. She stared at me. Then she said something in return, and the device translated it as, "You are on fire." I looked over my shoulder. One of the crates had split open and released a cloud of packing material that had settled over my back like pale foam. I was not technically on fire. "Not on fire," I said. "Just debris. Can you move? Are you hurt?" "I am undamaged," she said, with a peculiar formality that sounded like she was quoting something. "You are large." "Yeah," I said. "That comes in handy sometimes." Part 3. The witness's eye had not noticed them arrive. I had been focused on getting the shelf frame off my back and conducting a quiet personal inventory of what hurt and what might be broken. Shoulder. Definitely strained. Possibly worse. Pride. Entirely intact. It was only when I sat up and turned around that I became aware of the audience. There were 7 of them. 4 were Velthari guards. The diplomatic security detail, instantly recognizable by their deep gray uniforms and the long ceremonial staffs they carried. They had clearly run when they heard the crash. They stood in a semicircle at the end of the corridor, and they were completely, utterly still, not the controlled stillness of beings maintaining professional composure. Something different, something I had never seen in a Velthari before. They were frozen, behind them, taller than the guards. Her 4 arms partially extended in what I had learned was a Velthari gesture of extreme distress, stood a woman I had seen twice before in diplomatic briefings. Councillor Vael, the head of the Velthari delegation. The most senior alien official on Earth, Sev's mother. I knew this because Sev, still sitting in my lap on the corridor floor surrounded by scattered crates and broken packing material, had looked at the tall figure and said, in her small, clear voice, "Mava." The large human caught me. Councillor Vael did not move. Her amber eyes, the same shape as her daughter's, but vastly older, layered with something I could not name, were fixed on me. The extended arms slowly lowered, one pair at a time, in a movement that seemed entirely involuntary, like a deep breath taken unconsciously. I realized, with a slight chill, that she had seen the whole thing they all had. I became abruptly aware of how I must look. Sitting on the floor in a maintenance uniform, covered in packing foam, one shoulder very obviously not sitting at the correct angle, cradling a Velthari child in my arms while an entire security detail and the most powerful alien diplomat on Earth stared at me in absolute silence. I did what felt natural. I carefully helped Sev to her feet, checked her over one more time with the methodical attention of someone who had been trained in basic field first aid, and then stood up myself, slowly, because the shoulder was making its feelings very clearly known, and said, "She's not hurt. The shelf wasn't anchored to the wall correctly. That's my fault. It was on my work order. I'm sorry it wasn't done sooner." The silence continued for 4 more seconds. Then the guard on the far left made a sound. It was not quite a word. The translation device didn't catch it. But the guard beside him turned to look at him, and then looked back at me, and then, almost imperceptibly, inclined his head. A Velthari guard inclined his head to a human maintenance worker. I had no idea what that meant. I found out later. Part 4. What Councillor Vael said she asked to see me the following morning, formally in the diplomatic reception chamber. My shoulder had been assessed, badly strained, nothing broken. A bruise across the shoulder blade that the medical officer described with some enthusiasm as genuinely impressive. I had been relieved of duties for 48 hours, which I spent mostly lying on my bunk wondering if I was in trouble and whether it was for the shelf or for touching a diplomat's child or both. The summons did not help my sense of calm. The reception chamber was designed for Velthari proportions, which meant I felt approximately the size of a house cat as I walked in. Councillor Vael was seated, all 4 arms folded in a posture the diplomatic briefings described as formal receptiveness, with 2 of her senior aides standing behind her. No guards. That detail would later be explained to me as significant. I stood before her and waited. She studied me for a long moment. Then the translation device between us, a much higher quality model than my collar unit, spoke in a voice that somehow managed to carry the full harmonic weight of her words. "I watched you move," she said. "I have reviewed the corridor recordings. From the moment the shelving unit began its fall to the moment you had my daughter secured, 4.1 of your seconds passed. You covered the distance in 2.3 of them." I wasn't sure what to say to that. "I was closer than the guards," I offered. "Yes," she said. "They were behind me. You were ahead of me. You were the only one in position." A pause. "But that is not what I find remarkable." She leaned forward slightly. "You turned your back to the falling object," she said. "You placed your body between the impact and my daughter. You did this without hesitation, without calculation, for a child you do not know, of a species you have known for less than 2 years." Another pause. "You accepted the harm so that she would not receive it. She's a kid," I said. "And then, because that seemed insufficient, anyone would have." "No," Councillor Vael said very quietly. "They would not. That is what I have been sitting with since yesterday." She was silent for a moment. In that silence, I became aware that her hands, one set of them, the lower pair, were not folded as tidily as the others. They were held together in her lap with a slight tension, the fingers interlaced in a way that looked almost human. "In our culture," she said finally, "there is a concept. It does not translate directly. The closest your language offers is something like sovereign vulnerability. It describes the state of allowing harm to find you so that it does not find another. Among my people, it is regarded as the highest expression of—" She paused while the translation device processed. "Of what you might call courage. But it is more than courage. It is the willingness to be diminished, to be struck, to let the universe know where you stand by standing there when it hurts." She looked at me steadily. "My people do not ask for help," she said. "You know this. We consider need a private matter. A wound to be healed in silence. It is why your species has sometimes found us a little bit I admitted. Something shifted in her expression. The Velthari equivalent, I would learn, of a rueful smile. Yesterday, she said, you did not ask if you could help. You did not wait for permission. You did not calculate the diplomatic implications of contact with a Velthari minor. You simply saw a child in danger and you moved. A pause. This is also sovereign vulnerability. The vulnerability of the helper, who risks refusal, who risks being wrong, who risks being hurt, and acts regardless. She rose to her full height. I was looking up at her chin. I cannot repay what you did, she said. My culture has no framework for it. We do not have a transaction that covers this. You preserved something irreplaceable to me. Another pause, longer. But I want you to understand something, Corporal Mwangi. When I review the recording and I see you turn your back to the falling shelf, when I see you choose to be struck, I do not see a lesser species. I do not see a maintenance worker. I see something my people speak of in our oldest stories. She placed one hand, her upper right, flat against her sternum. You showed us what it looks like, she said, to love a stranger. Part 5. What Sev gave. Me 2 days later, my shoulder in a sling and my return to work still pending, there was a knock at the door of my quarters. Sev was standing in the corridor. She was alone, which, given her mother's diplomatic security, meant she had either been given explicit permission or had exercised the kind of independent decision-making that explains why Velthari guards look perpetually exhausted. She had both lower arms behind her, back in a posture I recognized as holding something. Hey, I said. Hello, large human, she said. The translation device rendered this with a faint lilt that I was choosing to interpret as affectionate. Dara, I said. My name is Dara. She processed this. Dara. She tried the syllables individually, then together. Nodded once, apparently satisfied. I made you something. She brought her lower arms forward. She was holding a piece of Velthari metalwork, a flat disc, perhaps 10 centimeters across, hammered from silver-gray metal into a shape that I recognized after a moment as an abstracted figure. Bipedal, arms extended, curved slightly forward. Protecting something. Mava said I should not make you a gift because it would imply a debt, Sev said. But I am small and I do not entirely understand the rules yet. So I made it anyway. I took it from her carefully with my good hand. It was heavier than it looked. The edges were smooth, the hammering marks visible but deliberate. The work of small, careful hands. Did you make this yourself? I asked. Yes. I have been learning craft work. My instructor says I am imprecise. A pause. I think imprecise means I make different things than I intend to. Sometimes those are better, I said. She tilted her head sideways, considering this. When the shelf was falling, she said suddenly, I did not know it was falling. I was looking at the pattern on the crate. Then you were there, and then we were on the floor, and the noise was very loud. Yeah, I said. It happened fast. I have been thinking about it, she said. I could not see you until you were already holding me. You came from behind me, and I did not know you were there. She paused. My Mava says that is what makes it. She searched for the word. True, that you did not do it because I would see you. You did it because I was there. I looked at the little metal figure in my hand. Your mom is very wise, I said. She cried, Sev said, with the candid flatness of a child delivering information. After you left, I saw her. She thought I was asleep. I didn't have anything to say to that. I held the metal disc and looked at this small silver child in my doorway and felt very unexpectedly the pressure of something enormous and quiet in my chest. Will you stay at the compound? Sev asked. For another 8 months, I said. That's my posting. Good, she said. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor, bouncing slightly with each step, her 4 arms swinging in 2 pairs of opposite rhythm, a child being a child in a world she was still learning the rules of. I watched her go. Epilogue. What was written 6 months later, when the Velthari delegation prepared to return home for the annual conclave, Councillor Vael submitted a formal diplomatic addendum to the Interspecies Exchange Agreement. I was not present for the signing. I only read about it later, in a memo that was passed down from the Diplomatic Liaison Office to the Maintenance Department, which was itself unusual enough that I knew it had been intentional. The addendum was 4 paragraphs long and dealt primarily with adjustments to the compound's structural standards. Specifically, a new protocol requiring all temporary shelving and storage fixtures to be wall and cord within 24 hours of installation. But the final paragraph read, in the careful formal language of interspecies diplomacy, as follows. It is the position of the Velthari delegation that humanity's capacity for instinctive protective action, specifically the documented willingness of individual humans to absorb physical harm on behalf of others, including non-kin and non-species individuals, without calculation or expectation of reciprocity, represents a form of moral intelligence that the Velthari people had not previously encountered and had not previously considered within their frameworks of civilizational assessment. The delegation recommends this capacity be formally noted in the Interspecies Registry as a defining characteristic of human culture. My maintenance supervisor framed the memo and put it on the wall above the coffee station. I kept the metal disc on my workbench. 8 months later, when my posting ended, I carried it home in my front pocket. The little hammered figure with its arms extended, slightly imprecise, slightly different from what was intended. Sometimes those are better.